Hello, welcome to tonight's Cleveland Photographic Society meeting. It's a black and white competition, November 6, 2020. Before we get started, we do have a few announcements, actually very few announcements today. Some upcoming competitions. On November 20th, we have the Creative Pictorial Competition. The deadline for entry is November 11th. And that's the last competition of this calendar year. The next one will be January 8th. It will be a people and pictorial competition, and the deadline for that is December 30th. One other announcement, I don't really have a slide for this, but I want to point out that there is a Photoshop Virtual Summit that's being held, and you can, we put a notice in the snapshot with some information about that. It's a free summit. It's virtual, 5 days worth of classes, so it's a really nice bargain. You're getting some great stuff for no charge at all. So I would highly recommend that. And if, again, for details, look at the current weekly snapshot. And again, we want to remind you, you can watch this and all Friday evening meetings at your convenience on the CPS YouTube channel. There is a link on the CPS website homepage, or if you open YouTube and search for Cleve Photographic. We'd invite you to subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. So as I said, tonight is our second black and white competition for the 2020-2021 year. Tonight we have 125 images, 74 black and white, and 51 pictorial. And let me introduce our judges for the evening. Our first judge is Glenn Petranek. Glenn is a lifelong photographer who specializes in a bit of everything, but with some emphasis on the urban landscape and Americana. He does consider himself a professional fine art photographer. He does sell his work at art shows in Northeast Ohio, obviously except for this year when all the shows have been canceled. He has given presentations, judged, and more for CPS going way back to when they were on Superior Avenue downtown. So that's quite a while ago. Our second judge is Steve Manchook. Steve became interested in photography through his childhood friend and often CPS judge. One of tonight's judges, Glenn Petranek. Steve bought his first camera in 1967 and soon after set up a home darkroom. He was both a school newspaper and yearbook photographer, so he kind of cut his teeth in high school. In 1973, he attended the Naval School of Photography and spent 4 years in the Navy as an aerial recon photographer. Beginning in 1977, he spent more than a decade working as a part-time wedding, school portrait, and commercial photographer. He's been judging for many years and often judges along with Glenn at the same competition. He bought his first digital camera in May of 2000, and he and Glenn assembled a slideshow of digital works and became advocates of digital photography. The majority of his work is from northeastern Ohio, though his favorite away-from-home destination is New England. And our final judge is Stuart Pearl. Stuart is a documentary photographer who has been a strong advocate for the arts in Cleveland all of his life. He's board president of the Artist Archives of the Western Reserve, as well as one of their archived artists. He has been quite active in the community as a judge for several photography organizations. He regularly lectures on photography and is a volunteer naturalist in the region's park system, as well as the Holden Arboretum. His work has been exhibited in several Ohio museums, the metro parks, multiple publications for the Cleveland Museum of Art, and media for WVIZ Idea Stream. He has won Best in Show for the 2008 Butler Institute of American Art annual competition. His current projects include photography for a Metro Parks guidebook on fish of Northeast Ohio, documentation of Holden's Stickworks sculpture, and the ongoing photo survey for the Acacia Reservation Restoration Project. He currently lives in Lyndhurst with his wife Jean, who has been generously supportive of his photography career over more than 4 decades. And as Stuart puts it, she is extremely patient. So let's just go over the judging criterion in case you're new to the club and are not aware of it. Each judge will score an image on a scale of 5 to 9. The final score for each image is the total of all 3 judges' scores. Images are judged on 3 criteria: impact, composition, and technique. So 3 points, up to 3 points are assigned for each one of those to get to a potential score of 9 per judge. A perfect score is 27. Those are relatively rare, and so we'll see if we have any tonight. So we're going to begin with the black and white competition. Before we do, though, we're going to have a quick word from Bill Keaton, who is the chair of the competition committee. Bill?
Yes, just a couple things I wanted to bring up. It's kind of hard sometimes to enforce the rules when we have a meeting face-to-face, and there's a couple rules I want to mention that have been broken lately. First, images should have a title of no more than 30 characters. This has to do with the database we compile so that end of the year you know what your images are. So please try to limit your titles to 30 characters. And in this competition, and I believe once in the last, images snuck through that had watermarks with people's signatures or names. That we have to stop. So just as a heads up from competitions from this point forward, if there's any initials, signatures, or watermarks on an image that identifies a photographer, we will be disqualifying those. We need to keep this as nonpartisan as possible. The judges should not know the name of the photographer. So again, from going forward, any photograph with a watermark with a name on it will be disqualified. Thanks.
Okay. So tonight we're going to begin with the black and white. And as I said, there were 74, 75 images in black and white. And we will be commenting on all of the black and white images.
Mike, do you want to introduce the speakers tonight?
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you very much. We have some guest readers that are filling in for the judges. And so for Bill, you're reading for Steve Manchook. Dave Ciborek is reading for Glenn Petranek. And Chuck Fitzgerald is reading for Stuart Pearl. So I thank you, gentlemen, for taking care of that for us. And so let's get started with the black and white competition.
Glenn Petranek says, great tonality and good composition, but the subject gets lost in the soft background. The sky is a little bland also.
Okay, the photograph is Old MacDonald Had a Farm by Mike Lansdale, 19 points.
Steve says a common study that is good overall. Centering the black post tends to make the image look split into exactly 2 parts. The fact that it is a diagonal to the frame keeps the image from being too static.
Okay, the image is 105 Steps to the Top, Jupiter Lighthouse by Susan Mahorchik, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says, this is a very interesting and pleasing, relaxing tonal composition, well suited to black and white, which presents the viewer with the interesting array of interlocking shapes. The implied diagonal of the light crop on the petals hints a sense of motion which energizes what could have been just a static image. The eye is led on a journey through droplet to droplet, which then is framed by the border of sharply defined vegetation on the upper right and the soft, out of focus canvas at the lower left. The highlights in the upper left are a little distracting and could have either been burned or adjusted in levels.
Okay, the image is entitled After the Rain by Franz Sennheiser. 23 points, third place.
Glenn's comment: enjoyed the tonal gradation and also the image placement. The blacks are black and the whites are white, although the subject is not inspiring.
Okay, the image is called Beach 6. It's by Omar Jeffries. 20 points.
A restful image, Steve says. The capture of this tree-lined path is centered and uniform. The tones add to the peaceful feeling. I generally avoid centering such images, but it would change the feeling and create a bit more tension.
The image is called Birch Alley by Vicky Wirt. 19 points.
Stuart has this to say: this is a good standard record of an iconic image, sharp, well exposed, and nicely framed. The stormy clouds, a nice atmosphere to an almost medieval looking structure. This is nicely suited for black and white. The verticals could have been straightened slightly, but that is not a showstopper. Perhaps more a matter of taste. From an aesthetic perspective, there is excellent sharpness in the fore and mid-ground elements, but this extends too far to the opposite shore. Coupled with equally weighted black levels and the far bank, this diminishes an effective sense of depth. This works reasonably well with the sky, but a softer, less harsh amount of the detail would have created a better sense of atmospheric perspective. The human eye tends to see the foreground darker and sharper as opposed to the hazier, less distinct distance. We don't see every element in a scene with equal visual weight.
Okay, the image is called Budapest Chain Bridge by Donna Schneider. 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn's comment: this is an interesting carved relief, but I'm distracted by the molting of the light on the subject, and my eyes gets drawn to the brightness at the top.
Okay, the image is called Congo Square by Gary Marich. 19 points.
An interesting take on a common farm scene, Steve says. The lighting is quite contrasty, but the maker seems to have handled it as well as possible. I would try to bring out a bit more white in the shadow areas in the center of the frame.
The image is called Cow Butts by Tammy Jankovic. 20 points.
Stuart says, the emotional impact strikes you first in a subject that is well suited for a black and white. Color would only distract. Your point of view is engaged by some interesting dental work that engages the viewer. Is this a happy person in the midst of a laughter? Or is he beginning to express grief during the onset of bad news? Either way, you're drawn into an effective composition.
The image is entitled Cracking Up by Bill Keaton. 23 points, third place.
Glenn's comment is the flowers nicely rendered and sharp. The few water drops are nice, but needs better contrast all around.
Okay, the image is entitled Dahlia by Elda Baroni, and it's 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says this is a good overall composition. The carving itself here is a bit hot and could use some darkening. It also is a bit unsharp, which weakens its impact.
The image is entitled Eagle Chief by Jim Rowe. 18 points.
Stuart says, less is more, and the viewer is enticed into a visual mystery in this image. Is this person hiding from somebody? Checking on her daughter's date who has just arrived home? Or simply just checking on the weather? Either way, you stay and think the photo which makes it successful. There is just the right amount of illumination on the eyes, whose rounded organic beauty contrasts very nicely with which the straight, sharp geometry of the window blinds. The latter provides great framing and focusing your attention. This was well thought out and executed, and another solid choice as a black and white conversion.
The image is entitled Espionage by Fran Marino, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, the black and white range is good on the white bear, but could use better depth of field. Either show the whole bear or crop in tighter.
The image is entitled Fearsome by Michael Halper, 21 points, honorable mention.
An interesting take on fireworks, Steve says. As much as the 4 images as a set are interesting, there may be too many elements. Removing the 2 lower images would simplify and strengthen the presentation, in my opinion.
The image is entitled Fireworks by Brian O'Riordan, 22 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says, this is a nicely done, traditionally lit steampunk portrait done in a solid documentary style. All the engaging elements are sharp, and the angled pose nicely leads the eye around the person's face. The lighting was safe and results in a solid image. Perhaps more dramatic lighting would have delivered greater impact. For example, if a portion of the face or background was partially hidden in a shadow, that would have created some mystery. There's nothing wrong with the way this was executed, but it is fairly standard pose that many use. Unexpected illumination would place the individual in a more mysterious environment and make a good pose much more stunning and memorable.
The image is entitled Gearhead by Jackie Sieski, 23 points, third place.
Glenn's comment is, looks like it was taken from a moving car. It needs a little better sharpness and contrast and cropping. The image is between the upper tree line and above the bottom blur.
The image is called German Hillside by Dan Lester, 17 points.
Steve says, at first glance, the 3 stamen look like human fingers. It is this first impression that sets this image apart. The wider values seem missing and might help add some pop to the overall image.
The image is entitled Gladiolus by Vicky Wirt, 20 points.
Stuart says, a sense of forlorn loneliness immediately strikes the viewer. The picture has impact, a relevant solitary feel in this time of COVID isolation. It's depressingly effective. The sky is perfectly processed to add this to this emotional weight. The photo is well suited to the vertical format, but the tree could have benefited more from greater range in the mid-tone grays. The silhouette is just slightly too harsh and almost looks like it was cut and pasted into the sky. A more gentle transition between that and the background would be helpful. All in all, though, the conceptual process here is solid.
The image is called Heron Lookout by Rick Carroll, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn's comment is, enjoyed the bird, his composition, and the sharpness of the feathers. Although bokeh is desirable, I feel it makes more of a distraction than an enhancement in this case.
The image is called Inquisitive Parrot by Nancy Kikelik. 21 points, honorable mention.
Impressive architecture that pulls your eye upwards, Steve says. The people half cropped at the bottom of the frame is only moderately distracting.
The image is entitled Ireland Church No. 1 by Robert Boyle. 19 points.
In Stuart's opinion, photographers should not include their watermark on competition photos. Not only is this a major distraction, but I doubt CPS will steal the image for their use. That being said, the image is sharp, well shot with solid processing, and shows a pleasing tonal range from deep black to highlighted feathers. The pose conveys a sense of power and aggression which is effective. Technically, it is a nicely done photo. However, the composition is fairly static and resembles many other eagle pictures we have seen. It lacks that special uniqueness which can raise it above very similar images.
The image is entitled Juvenile Bald Eagle by David Fox. 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn's comment, the viewpoint is nice. The rock formation is a nice lead to the towering tree. Seems to be a bit too contrasty in this case.
The image is entitled Kendall Ledges by Dave Ciborek. 20 points.
Steve says a shallow focus rendering of an imposing creature. The eye and face being perfectly focused makes the shot. Everything else is subordinate.
The image is entitled Lizard's Eye by Mike Kopkas. 19 points.
Stuart says, the image reminds me of Weston's beautiful black and white studies of peppers and other compositions of the early 20th century. This is a beautifully shot and processed. The soft illumination does a wonderful job of delivering a great tonal range from bright highlight to dark shadow. This enhances the visual illusion. We know this as a shriveled leaf, but it looks like looking down upon the hills and valleys of some dried floodplain, and the eyes take pleasures in exploring those rises and valleys. Additionally, not placing this on a solid black palette was an excellent decision. Even though this is a static photo, the variable gray background imparts a slight sense of transition and motion to the simple dead leaf. It adds to the sense of tangible substance and texture. A little more sharpening could have been applied to some of the edge areas, but the design process here is very solid.
The image is entitled Lotus Leaf No. 30 by Bill Keaton. 23 points, third place.
Glenn says, all in all, a fairly solid image. The clean rectangular reflection pairs well with the adjacent sides. I recommend cropping the right as it does not contribute to the subject.
The image is entitled Mocha by Joseph Miko. 20 points.
A simple composition, Steve says, strong ambient lighting, repetitive subject, a perfect trio, proving that simplicity can make for a strong presentation.
The image is entitled MoMA Chairs by Jane Sidney. 23 points, third place.
Stuart says, this is a humorous shot that gave me a good chuckle. It's kind of a what's up moment that's nicely framed by the nest, which in turn is set off by the negative space of the sky. The bright area could have possibly been darkened by either a polarizer or a red-yellow channel adjustment in post, but it's not a deal breaker. The head, eye, and most of the beak are razor sharp, and timing was good. This is a decent photograph.
The image is entitled Nesting by Salvatore Germano, 20 points.
Glenn says, the bird is well rendered, sharpness and contrast. I find the composition interesting for the subject. Would vertical be another option?
The image is entitled Nuthatch by David Burns, 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says a high-key landscape that only suffers in the fact that some of the highlights are blown out on some of the tree leaves, reducing the rendering of detail.
The image is called Plum Creek North by Eric Wethington, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says this is a technically challenging photo due to the extreme brightness range between the edge highlights and the shadowed foreground of the subject. It's a pleasing composition, and there are some solution of these issues. The initial exposure was about 1/2 to 1 stop too bright, but that's water over the dam. If a raw file is available, the exposure, brightness, and light levels can be adjusted downward somewhat to reclaim potentially blown pixels. Once this is converted to a JPEG or a TIFF for final post, an exposure adjustment layer can be applied to the now darker shaded areas of the RAM and then adjusted upwards in levels, with contrast thrown in to ensure creation of some clean blacks. Brightness could be further adjusted to tone down some of the edge highlights, taking care not to create halos which are evident along the snout. Additional selective sharpening can also be applied since the RAM overall looks a bit soft. Overall, the image is fair and with a little work can be improved.
The image is entitled Ram Near Mesa Verde by Jim Rowe, 18 points.
Glenn's comment. The contrasts from the subject and the reflection are strong. I would like to see it simplified. The reed on the left takes away from the more delicate form on the right.
The image is entitled Reflection by Brian O'Riordan, 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says the lighting here is very dramatic and composition is good. The hot spot of the pointed area of the emerging leaf needs toning down. The focus is a bit soft as well.
The image is entitled Rosebud and Raindrops by Darla Zajac, 19 points.
Stuart says this is a very wistful, fantasy-type shot that emotionally can send the viewer off in numerous directions. It does engage the audience, though, and make you think. It is very successful in that regard. The concept is interesting, and the angled point of view is different from what most people expect. This makes the photo more unique than the cliché Sleeping Beauty shot. The hair treatment was beautifully processed and takes the eye back to the head and face in a pleasing and relaxed visual journey. Unfortunately, the glaring necklace is a major distraction and exceeds the tonal range of what we might expect. Overall, though, exposure is very good for setting the mood, and just the right amount of sharpness has been applied to the important areas of the composition.
The image is entitled Royal Kiss Awaits by Serena Cernak, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, great action capture and superb exposure and contrast. The foreground details make a nice touch. Possibly suggests cropping some from the left.
The image is entitled Shadow Silhouette by Susan Bestel, 23 points, third place.
Steve says the rendering of the subject with his dark head lowered gives a bit of mystery. Although we are almost certain of its identity, it seems to prefer anonymity.
All right. The image is entitled Similar by Michael Halper, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says, this beautifully captured photo earns high marks for timing, composition, and processing. Normally we see static shots of what appears to be an egret just standing there, but this one seems to be in the middle of a stalk. We are able to enjoy the implied motion. Does she see something, or is he just having a moment to take the weight off? There is a full tonal range from deep blacks in the background to textured whites and well-defined wings. Plus, we're treated to the bonus of an upturned detail of tail feathers. Shallow depth of field does an excellent job of isolating the bird from a toned background of grays that not only provides environmental context, but also pushes the main subject forward to the viewer. This was very well done.
The image is entitled Snowy Egret by Dave Ciborek, 23 points, third place.
Glenn says, sorry, but I have a hard time identifying the subject. It looks nice and feathery, but it is sitting on something that I also find unidentifiable.
The image is entitled Spent Mayfly, Trout Fly by Gary Marich, 20 points.
Common, everyday objects rendered in black and white to give a nostalgic theme. The type cropping demands that we observe the details and the simple design of these not-so-ancient devices.
The image is entitled Standing at Attention by Bonnie Luxo, 20 points.
Stuart says, nicely done in black and white. This well-exposed image makes one think of an afternoon cup of tea. Two technical elements are a little troubling, though. First, there's an implied diagonal between the heavy fruit and basket in the upper left corner and the negative empty space in the lower right. It makes the image feel top-heavy with a lean to the right. Additionally, the point of sharpness focus is the fruit basket and not the teacup as one would expect. Either the focus point was off, aperture opening was too large for sufficient depth of field, or both. Other than that, the tonal range and reflections are very pleasing. It was a good concept and just needs a little work.
The image is entitled Still Life by Mike Kopkas, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, the spinning wheel is sharp and well rendered. However, the light source on the right and the wood reflection on the left need to be toned down.
The image is entitled Stone Garden Spinner by Dennis Wirt, 23 points, third place.
Steve says, isolating flowers with a dark background means that the foreground is all that is there to gain our attention. This composition is a bit ironic. Two flowers facing left, a third looking to the right. A rebel. The lighting is good, but almost too flat.
The image is entitled Striped Dahlia by James Sidney, 22 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says, I believe this is the bean in Chicago shot in a unique manner that people don't usually consider. Using just a portion of the sculpture has enhanced the abstraction in which the solid, stately skyline appears to be liquefied and bent. This is in stark contrast to the straight and rigid structures behind. Many photograph this sculpture, but I've seen no images that use it this way. It's a clever contrast and gratifyingly conceptual in the way it was composed. Color would have been a distraction, so the choice of black and white was well made.
The image is entitled The Bean, Black and White by Wayne Fierstein. 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn's comment. A good rendering of this butterfly conservatory. The straight-on composition works in this case. The white of the the white of the structure pops very well.
The image is entitled The Conservatory in Black and White by Nancy Kekelik. 21 points, honorable mention.
Quite the studio setup with a large prop, fire, and a lady, Steve says. Her expression either implies she is bored or hates singing on a piano top. The only distraction to me is the light tone curtain. This would be a simpler, more intimate composition if the curtain were black or greatly toned down.
The image is entitled The Great Gatsby by Jackie Sieski. 23 points, third place.
Stuart thinks this is a well-executed candid portrait with great tonal range that almost makes you hear the music. There is an engagement with the photographer which adds energy, and the narrow depth of field pushes the subject away from the overly busy background. The hot highlights on the face and hands could be toned down a little bit, and there could be a little better separation between the long hair and tapestry. Good timing and solid framing make this a successful image.
The image is entitled The Musician by Darla Zajac. 22 points, honorable mention.
Glenn's comment. This has a nice progression of foreground, midground, and background. Contrast is good, and the clouds set it off.
The image is entitled Totality of Nature by Bob Kowaleski. 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says a composition with two leading lines that end up in a light and fairly uninteresting sky. Darkening the sky would pop the white clouds. Lightening the tones on the two bridge spans would also provide more detail and a higher key.
The image is entitled Under the Bridge to the Port of Miami by Susan Mahorchik. 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says this is a wonderful architectural structure that offers many photographic opportunities. The trick is to find an interesting angle with the congested landscape. This was a good attempt, but there are more interesting angles and a better time of day for interesting light. With this type of intense overhead lighting, the photographer would have been better off focusing on smaller details or abstract compositions. There is a distracting merge of the overhead power line and other objects like the traffic post intruding on the doorway. Post-processing was overly heavy-handed. Either too much contrast was added, the final image was over-sharpened, or both. Halos are apparent in some areas. I would suggest that the photographer return to his building either much earlier in the day or significantly later on. Walk its foundation, study the various design details, and see how they look under different lighting.
The image is entitled University Circle by Salvatore Germano. 18 points.
Glenn says, the placement of the duck is nice. The diagonal makes for a strong composition. Highlights seem good, but could use some deeper blacks.
The image is called Upon Reflection by Belinda Prinz. 19 points.
I like the gear within a gear composition at top, Steve says. The reflection with the tiny gear at the bottoms distracts more than it helps, in my opinion. The composition could be made simpler by removing the lower third of the image and leaving just a small amount of the large gear reflection at the bottom of the frame.
The image is entitled Watch Gear Inside a Clock Gear by Tom Bognar, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says this is one of his favorite selections of the competition, as it offers a number of very pleasing geometric shapes that interact in an unusual and expected ways. The combinations are not what you would normally expect. This adds tremendous interest and also exercises the brain a bit as it studies the relationships. This photo is all about diverse shape elements, so black and white is the best media choice. The vertical crop is the perfect format as the structure reaches for the sky. You can almost feel yourself being pulled up by the rope ladder as you gaze up the canvas. With all elements sharp and in focus, this was a well spotted and composed.
The image is entitled Where I'd Rather Be by Rich Foley, 22 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, a very good human interest image. The blanket is almost blending into the wall, and the rest of the image goes flat. Tends to come off muddy overall.
The image is entitled All Clean by Tammy Jankovic, 22 points, honorable mention.
A strong composition, Steve says. The 3 smoke plumes add drama and exposure is very good. Missing but much appreciated would be a person in the frame for scale.
The image is entitled Awesome 765 Locomotive Steaming Up the Night by Serena Cernick, 25 points, first place.
Stuart says this was a perfect time of day with superb lighting to shoot such a picture. The flat overhead illumination reveals a myriad of interesting details in the shadows and also extends the grayscale tonal range of the photograph with even pleasing results. A stronger image may have been created by moving closer and to the left, which would crop out the foreground bush on the right. It doesn't really support the image. I believe it would be a better position, the hand relative to the Mocha building. This is another one of those environments where you just have to hike around the main elements and pick those compositions that are most effective.
The image is entitled Big Hand by Joseph Miko, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, the sepia and texture works well here. The angle gives a good view of the room and context. The windows are a bit hot, but does not hurt the image that much.
The image is entitled Country Kitchen by Robert Boyle, 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says a landscape scene with a lot of similar tones on the grayscale. This drops the contrast somewhat and reduces the impact a bit. Add a bit of contrast to bring out more of the fine details.
The image is entitled Epic Sculpturing by Bob Kowaleski, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says the photo conveys a pleasant serenity and time of relaxation, but it is predictably centered. Your eye notes that and wants to move on to something more interesting. This isn't a bad thing, but anytime the viewer is more engaged with the picture, it becomes a more satisfying visual interaction. Moving either to the left or right could have solved this issue if there was available space. There also seems to be an overall softness to the image, which could be the result of a mild camera shake, a missed focus point, or too shallow depth of field. There are potentially good elements here, though. The photographer just needs to explore additional angles and viewpoints.
The image is entitled Fishing the Temperance River by Rick Carroll, 20 points.
Glenn's comment, interesting capture and nice ring light around the bird. However, this would be better as a vertical, and the bright highlights on the left are distracting.
The image is entitled Great Blue Heron Grooming by David Fox, 20 points.
Steve says, good use of a framing element in the foreground to add interest to the signage in the background. The heart sign and lettering over it is a bit washed out and could use a bit of burning if there is detail to recover. If this is a raw file, it might be possible.
The image is entitled It's as Plain as Black and White, It's Not a Movie by Fran Marino, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart thinks this photograph is very reminiscent of the old master landscape artists with their dreamy compositions of peaceful times. There's a pleasing diagonal balance between the birds in flight and the drifting swan, and the foggy background provides the perfect canvas for these sharper objects. The swan is slightly overexposed, though, and has lost a little bit of highlight detail. Overall, though, this is another good example of atmosphere perspective in which the human eye perceives near objects as sharper and clearer, while further objects in the background are more indistinct. I do wonder, though, if this is a composite image, since the flying birds actually seem sharper than the swan.
The image is entitled Morning Fog and Pelicans by Elda Baroni, 23 points, third place.
Glenn says, compositionally, a good placement of the mausoleum. Overall contrast is a bit too harsh, with some areas washing out.
The image is entitled Monument in Infrared by Fran Zonheiser, 18 points.
Steve says an imposing angle of the smiling, or very inquisitive, fuzzy-top observer. The eye seems to be dead, but still mysterious and dangerous looking all the same.
The image is entitled My Good Side by Tom Bognar, 21 points, honorable mention.
Stuart feels this is a solid documentary shot of the Brooklyn Bridge against the New York City skyline. There's much detail to study here, which is sharp and well exposed, but the black and white conversion actually makes it slightly difficult to differentiate the individual buildings. While there's an engaging impact of shape and texture here, I feel that a good photo could be made even better if viewed in its original color format. The strong lighting is pleasingly angled, and the numerous skyline colors could make an interesting architectural palette.
The image is entitled New York City by Richard Ader, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn's comment, the vertical composition works well here. I could be somewhat darker overall, which would make the lights pop a bit more.
The image is called Oil Can Church by Dennis Wirt, 19 points.
The overall composition here is good, Steve says. The dark leaves on the trees lack detail and might benefit from some creative dodging. Some of the tones on the house might be elevated a bit as well to show off more detail.
The image is entitled Old Shed by Rich Foley, 19 points.
Stuart says there is a wonderful sense of action and implied danger in this picture. These are exciting times and it reminds me of an old black and white westerns. The backlit illumination is perfect in the way it shifts through the dust and provides some edge lighting to the horses. The angle of the cowboy's lasso is also perfect to the direction of the stampeding horses. Noise is present, but it works well with the subject matter in clouds of airborne dust. One must be careful, though, with black and white vignettes, but it effectively works with the glowing dust clouds. This is beautifully composed, shot, and processed.
The image is entitled Roundup 8120 Black and White by Ronald Wilson, 24 points, second place.
Glenn's comment. Image is well rendered for black and white. Lots of detail and smooth tonality. Like to see it squared up a bit as it currently skewed from an angle.
The image is entitled Safe at Mather Mansion by Bonnie Luxo, 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says this is a very powerful and dramatic angle and lighting treatment here on this building. The building black and white contrast is excellent. The sky has interest, but I would raise the white levels of the clouds just a bit to add more interest.
The image is entitled Seidman Cancer Center by Omar Jeffries, 22 points, honorable mention.
Stuart says the lighting in this photo is perfectly focused on the main point of view, and that's why the image is so successful. The hands seem to come right out of the screen in their steepled detail, which then gently leads you to the praying face. Everything else is in shadows. Everything else in the shadows is supporting context, which just reinforces what you're seeing. Timing of the picture was just right, and you can see the earnest emotion in the young man's face. Whether caught by luck or intentionally posed, the photo is very powerful.
The image is entitled Serenity by Kim Wazalewski, 20 points.
Glenn says, this image has a nice feel to it. The shafts of light are subtle, which really adds to it. Composition and contrast are spot on.
The image is entitled The Abbey of San Antimo by Susan Bestel, 21 points, honorable mention.
Steve says the insertion of the person on the path pops out like a pleasant surprise and at the same time adds a sense of scale to these trees. Although centering the subject has not hurt this image, cropping off a third of the left side of the image would place the person in a more interesting location. Some of the leaves at the bottom could be cropped as well.
The image is entitled The Lone Walker by Eric Wethington, 19 points.
Stuart says, although the lighting is very attractive, there is almost too much detail at the right to easily make out the key elements there. The problem is the foliage right behind the wreath and honor guard. It's much too busy. Perhaps a different angle from another side would have been more effective at moving the background in one direction or another. The processing on the monument is very appealing, and if there is some way to use that as part of the less cluttered composition, it would improve things overall.
The image is entitled The Unknown by Wayne Fierstein, 21 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, these shorebirds are well rendered and the reflections are good. They are a bit too spaced apart, causing the eye to bounce back and forth from one to another.
The image is entitled Twin Waders by Mike Lonsdale, 19 points.
Steve says this is a very complex landscape that is made busier by the harsh tonal contrast in some areas and lack of it in others. The center of interest could be the waterfall just off center, but it is hidden in its busy surroundings. This image would benefit from copious amounts of cropping to simplify the image for the viewer.
The image is entitled Waterfall Cascade in Thailand by Dan Lester, 18 points. And that concludes the black and white portion of our competition. We're now going to begin the pictorial section, and the judges made comments only on those pictorial images where comments were requested. So we will run through the first set of pictures. I'll read the title and the maker and the number of points. This first image is called After the Rain by Rick Carroll, 22 points, honorable mention. The next image, Autumn Drive by Omar Jeffries, 21 points. Cherry Blossom in Washington, D.C. by Elda Baroni, 18 points. Colors of a Rainy Fall by Wayne Fierstein, 22 points, honorable mention. Defending the Castle by Fran Marino, 22 points, honorable mention. Desert Rain by Mike Lonsdale, 20 points. Dreaming of Dead Things by Marge Brady, 23 points, third place. Egyptian Merchant number 2 by Richard Ader, 22 points, honorable mention. Fire and Glass by Kim Wazalewski, 21 points. Fireboat by Rich Foley, 18 points. Fireworks 1 by Ronald Wilson, 21 points. If God Had Meant Man to Fly by Mick Russo, 21 points. Lift Off with First Light by Serena Cernick, 22 points, honorable mention. Mellow Yellow Lunch by Belinda Prince, 21 points. Mist in the Valley 2 by Marge Brady, 25 points, first place. Moonglow by Bob Kowaleski, 22 points, honorable mention. Moroccan Market Treats by Richard Ader, 22 points, honorable mention. Mushroom Family by Joseph Miko, 23 points, third place. Pumpkins Out on a Limb by Ron Werman, 22 points, honorable mention. Red Door by Robert Boyle, 19 points. Rest in Peace by Fran Zahniser, 21 points. Santa Justa Lift by Dennis Wirt, 19 points. Splash 11 by Ronald Wilson, 22 points, honorable mention. Split Rock Lighthouse by Donna Schneider, 23 points, third place. Steps in the Park by Ron Werman, 19 points. Stone Mad Restaurant Mosaic by Bonnie Luxo, 19 points. The Muses Cleveland Art Museum by David Fox, 21 points. The Swamp by Rick Mills, 19 points. Tightrope by Kim Wazalewski, 20 points. Train by the Swamp by Rick Mills, 21 points. Veronica at Sunrise by Susan Bestel, 23 points, third place. All right, the rest of the images will be commented on. We start with Stuart.
Stuart says this can easily be a very engaging abstract as the eye follows the pattern around the spiral. The mix of highlighted and shadow add much more interest, and there is plenty of sharp stare detail to keep one's attention. All the main elements are in focus, and good solid processing resulted in a satisfying image.
This image is entitled, the image is entitled 105 Steps to the Bottom, Jupiter Lighthouse by Susan Mahorchik, 21 points.
Glenn says, a very good autumn image. The water is well rendered with great tonality and no hot spots. The eye moves into the image, enjoying the foliage along the way.
The image is entitled Above Bond Falls by Donna Schneider, 22 points, honorable mention.
Steve says, the oxymoron of the wash sign and the extremely weathered truck body is not lost on this viewer. The composition is good even though the truck tends to blend with the building somewhat.
The image is entitled All Wash by Jane Sidney, 20 points.
Stewart says there are many potentially interesting elements in this photo, but it's a challenge to determine the main focal point. Everything is well exposed and sharp, but the direct midday sun is not attractive or aesthetically pleasing. This is a good documentation, though, of an industrial complex. The two foreground trees are distracting, and I would find a way to crop or frame the composition more on just the man-made structures. The upper left corner has a diverse mix of geometric shapes and contrasts, and a portion of the right exhibits a similar mix. A narrow vertical crop of the center may also work. Overall, this is a good start, but a decision has to be made on what would be the most effective crop for a unique photograph.
The image is entitled Cleveland at Work by Dave Ciborek, 20 points.
Glenn says, this gives a feeling of an old western mining town. Good depth from the timbers to the background trees. A bit too hot with the vignetted sepia, in my opinion, but still works.
The image is entitled Colorado Silver Mine by Jim Rowe, 18 points.
Steve says, a good rendering of these two wilted and weathered water elements in their natural habitat. The gray backdrop tends to make these specimens float in the air, but the few partially submerged remnants below them imply they are still rooted in water. They help with the story, but they may be more of a distraction.
The image is entitled Death of the Lotus Leaves by Bill Keaton, 20 points.
Stuart says this is a truly in-your-face image, and there's no doubt the viewer is dealing with massive power and speed. Nothing will stop this. Framing is perfect, exposure is right on, processing is solid, and the slight out of focus characteristic of the jet only adds to the incredible sense of motion. Aesthetically, it's also helpful that the jet hangs on a pleasing blue sky. This is very well done.
The image is entitled Fast Aircraft by David Burns, 23 points, third place.
Glenn says the lighting is just right on this Pelican. He and others made a big mess of the lights under him. A more interesting sky would help, but we do not always have that option.
The image is entitled Florida Brown Pelican by Nancy Kukelik, 22 points, honorable mention.
Good lighting, focus, and perspective, Steve says. Timing is a bit off, as the fox on the right lowers its head, almost hiding from the lens. The fox looking away from the lens is okay. It gives the pose of a lookout watching for prey.
The image is entitled Foxes in Afternoon Sun by Jackie Sieski, 21 points.
Stuart says, here's another still life study of the aesthetic of the master painters that typified the classical period. Lighting appears to be from a window light or studio umbrella, softly lit in a pleasing way that provides attractive illumination to the complete tonal range of the values. Deep blacks in the shadows and contrasting bright highlights provide dimension to the individual elements, giving them mass and substance.
The image is entitled Gourds by Vicky Wirt, 24 points, second place.
Glenn says, the stacked firewood makes an interesting pattern. The light is smooth and even, which helps and hurts. Would like to see some contrast or something out of place to attract the eye.
The image is entitled Let It Snow by Gary Marich, 18 points.
Steve says good overall capture and composition. For a common subject, this captures the work of the bee well. Focus seems a bit soft overall.
The image is entitled On Nectar Mountain by Belinda Prince, 21 points.
Stuart says two curved and bright highlights in diagonal opposition to each other frame a monarch as it feeds. In another situation, this wouldn't work, but it's effective here, both seeming to act like stage lights for the industrious butterfly. Due to the extremely shallow depth of field, they are pleasantly out of focus and don't distract. The monarch is sharp, although it could have been benefited from about a half a stop more brightness using an exposure level mask. The blurred dappled background provide a good canvas for the main subject, and all the colors work in concert for a relaxing composition.
The image is entitled Royalty by Michael Halper, 20 points.
Glenn's comment? The flower is awesome in its color, detail, and texture. The background is unique and creative. Center position works in this case.
The image is entitled Sunflower on Glass by Brian O'Riordan, 23 points, third place.
Steve says the lighting here is a challenge, but handled reasonably well. The hot spots on the limb draw the eyes to it, unfortunately. The brightest elements in this scene are not the squirrel, so the harsh light pulls your eyes away from the hungry Mr. Squirrel. If this is a raw image, the limb might be able to be toned down.
The image is entitled Sunshine Breakfast by Salvatore Germano, 21 points.
Emotionally, there's a satisfying sense of accomplishment as a ladybug emerges from its long climb, says Stuart. With the extremely shallow depth of field, the main point of view is well centered on the insect, although additional sharpening could have been applied to the body. Exposure is right on, along with solid timing, and the complementary negative space in the upper right works well on the diagonal with the petals in the lower left. It effectively adds to the slow, methodical sense of motion as the bug climbs every skyward. This was nicely done.
The image is entitled The Climbing Ladybug by Darla Zajac, 22 points, honorable mention.
Glenn says, great interest and subject. The colors right on with great tone, rendering and detail throughout. The square format lends itself well here.
The image is entitled The Wolf and the Steampunk Princess by Marge Brady, 21 points.
Steve says time exposure of the falls is done nicely with some fall colors added for interest. Normally the waters run pretty brown. This rendering is more pleasing in that regard.
The image is entitled Top of the Falls by Rick Mills, 20 points.
Stewart says this is an interesting and different take on the blurred waterfall photo and gets some kudos for conceptual thinking. The twisting, cascading roots and grass at the left seem to mimic the flow of the water. There is a pleasing implied diagonal point of view that leads the eye from the lower left corner up to the white falls. Whether intentional or accidental, this is a nice effect. The two boulders distract a little, and perhaps moving to the left may have reduced their presence. There are many slow motion cascading streams and waterfalls out there, and this is somewhat fresh interpretation on what has become cliche and repetitive. Good capture.
The image is entitled Waterfall in the Fall by Ron Werman, 20 points.
Glenn says, so much interesting texture in this close elephant study. The background to the left is not obtrusive, causing the animal to pop. The top of the head is a bit hot and could be darkened a bit.
The image is entitled Wrinkled by Mike Kopkas, 20 points. And that concludes tonight's competition. For more information about competing or to join the Cleveland Photographic Society, please visit our website, clevelandphoto.org. We want to thank all of our judges and our readers who filled in for the judges. And we want to thank all those who entered and congratulate our winners. Please feel free to send us your feedback. Use info@clevelandphoto.org to send us your comments. So again, good night. Please feel free to join us on Friday evenings, virtually that is, and let us know, provide us with some feedback. Good night.